Just a quick note before the episode. Thank you all for your support and listening to the podcast. If you haven't done so yet and you enjoy the show, please leave a 5-star review where you listen. And if you enjoy this episode, consider buying me a coffee or checking out the Patreon. Natana Lynn Thomas went missing sometime in 1978, maybe in the summer, somewhere in Alaska or British Columbia. Natana, or Tana for short, and her husband, Mike Staso, who was stationed in the Army in Bremerton, Washington, went to Alaska in 1978 to visit Mike's family. At some point during the visit, Tana told her family that on their way home to Tacoma, Washington, they were going to stop in BC and other places along the way to do some sightseeing. Natana, who is Indigenous and part of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, was born on March 14, 1954. She grew up in Central California and also spent time in the Bay Area. She was briefly married to a man named Mohammad Matar before her marriage to Mike. There are not many theories on what may have happened to Natana or Mike, but one of the prevalent theories is that Mike may have not been happy in his military career and decided to go AWOL. There are also darker theories that they may have gone missing due to foul play. To the family's knowledge, neither person was ever reported missing. If you know anything about Natana or Mike's disappearance after listening to this episode, please contact me and I can put you in touch with Tana's cousin, Lori Roper, whom I spoke to for this episode.
Good. Like I said, I'm going to try not to get emotional. It's been a really long time, but again, nobody's paid attention to this since I was a freshman in high school, and I'm 59 this year. So
Wow.
it's really it's just, I don't know. It just feels like a really beautiful thing that you're doing. So thank you.
Oh, no problem. Well, let's start.
Yeah.
Let's start at the beginning. And one of the first questions I like to ask people is, what was your cousin like? What do you remember about her looks, her background, her ethnicity? Like, what would people need to know about her?
Yeah, for sure. So our family is part of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska, and there's some family members that definitely favor more of the Indigenous, dark-haired, dark-eyed, and she was absolutely that. I think I sent you a picture. I'm happy to forward another one, but she was in my eyes, she was a queen. She was my favorite cousin. She was probably about, I want to say 5'6", 5'7", dark long hair, very easy smile, very kind. The family, my aunt, her brother and sister and uncle lived in a little town that's Monterey, California adjacent by the name of Prunedale. And they lived on a ranch, and she had a horse. And she was like I said, she was my favorite cousin. That was her horse, and we spent a lot of time out with the horse, and she had a lot of friends. She was very, very kind and loved animals and loved people and was always very, very easy to jump in and help other people. So, yeah.
Do you remember the last time you saw your cousin? I know it was quite a while ago, but can you tell me about that?
Yep, it was probably 1974. I was 10 in 1974. And that maybe 10 or 11, but it would have been up at a visit at their home up there. And she was, I think, just getting ready to graduate high school, or maybe had graduated high school, and had, so it would have been up at their house in Prunedale at the ranch. They were, I think, getting ready to sell her horse. She had a new boyfriend at the time, the gentleman that her first husband that she married that unfortunately didn't end very positively. But yeah, it would have been about 1974, 1975.
Let's talk about that. The first husband.
Mm-hmm.
She had her husband Mike, who we'll talk about in a little bit because that kind of surrounds her disappearance a little bit more. But can you tell me about what you remember about her first marriage and how that may or may not have played a factor in her disappearance?
For sure. If I could give you a little background first, kind of on her and the upbringing. My aunt was one of the kindest women you'd ever know. my uncle by marriage was not a kind man, and she grew up. Tana, her brother Scott, and sister Robin grew up in a very difficult household. My uncle was abusive. My aunt was codependent. We didn't know much about codependence back then. We know a lot now, right? But Tana, the kids also grew up very much under the thumb of a authoritarian, angry man. And so Tana was looking for a way out, I'm sure. She met this gentleman by the name of Mohammad Matar. If I recall correctly, he was from Lebanon, had a couple brothers that he was working to bring over here. It was, supposedly love, but what we knew after the fact, that it was a green card marriage, and he sort of used that marriage to bring his brothers over. They lived in an apartment. He literally made her sleep on the floor, do the dishes. It was a very subservient, awful situation for her, beat her. So she was able to get out, moved home for a very short time. That unfortunately wasn't a whole lot better because her dad blamed her for being a bad wife. And she moved to Washington State, lived with my aunt for a little while up there in Tacoma, and that is where she met Mike.
So she meets her second husband, Mike. She abandons what I would call an abusive relationship or marriage. I don't think there's any other way to describe that. Do you remember? I mean, I know you were very young, or maybe what people have told you as well. Like, do you know what Mike and her marriage was like? I imagine it must have been much better than her first.
Yeah, I mean, I did talk to her on the phone. That was the old days when we had landlines and stuff. And she and my mom were really close as well. My mom was kind of her favorite aunt. So we talked a fair amount and got letters periodically. She was very excited. Mike, she described as very kind. And every interaction we had, we met him twice, and he did seem very doting and kind with her. My aunt had met his mom and dad. They came down. And I believe Mike was actually an only child. And it was very positive by all accounts. Didn't hear anything to the contrary, didn't see any evidence to the contrary. But I think they'd only really been married about a year when they disappeared.
And before we get into that, I just wanted to state as well, you mentioned, I think a little while ago, it's important to note that Mike was in the military, I believe the Navy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He was in the Army.
Oh, sorry, yeah. In the Army. Okay.
Yeah.
So what do we know? Like, I know you kind of sent me, a brief overview of what we think happened, but can you tell me about Mike and Tana going up to Alaska, why they were going there, and then, do we have a sense of when they were last seen, like when they dropped off the map?
Yep. So again, what I can tell you what I know. So they went to go visit his parents in Alaska. Apparently he got a leave of some sort. And this was in, I'm thinking summer of 78. So he got a leave to go visit his parents, and he and Tana were heading up to visit his parents. The last contact anybody had with them was a call from Tana to my aunt, saying that they were leaving Mike's parents in Alaska, that it was a wonderful visit, and talking about the next time that Tana would see her mom, and was anxious to tell her about the visit, but that they were going to be, traveling through BC and Canada on the way home, and we're going to be making stops at different places on the way home, kind of making a little sort of honeymoon kind of vacation, because they hadn't had the opportunity to do that yet, but they were going to be coming back to the Bremerton area and never arrived.
And that would seemingly be out of character for them to not come back to Bremerton and back to their home?
It was absolutely out of character for Tana, and to my knowledge, based on the conversations that family members had with Mike's parents, it was absolutely uncharacteristic of Mike as well. He was, did what he needed to do, was where he needed to be, but there was conversations that apparently between Tana and her mom, my aunt Nadine, that Mike was unhappy in the military, that he was not being treated very well. And then Mike's parents said to my aunt, and then also Sarah, my daughter, the person that kind of teed this whole thing up, Sarah had reached out to them via email at one point, and I believe that there were conversations in that email exchange that Mike was struggling a bit in the military. And so his parents were being encouraging, saying, hey, just go back, it's a short commitment. You can get out on, X date. You don't have to re-up. And that was kind of that.
And through our correspondence and my correspondence with Sarah, I got the impression that, and I think maybe you did as well, that maybe there's a chance that Mike went AWOL. Like, has that been something that's been discussed amongst the family?
You know what? That's the family floating theory. Yeah, that's nobody wants to believe the worst, right? Nobody wants to believe terrible things happened. They drove off a cliff. They were kidnapped or otherwise injured. The floating theory is, yes, that Mike went AWOL. The interesting thing about that is, again, I don't know about military law. I was wanting to look into that before you and I chatted. I'm sorry, I didn't have the opportunity to do that. But, I would have thought there would have been some sort of search for him. I know the military is a really big thing, a huge industrial complex, right? So maybe one guy missing and not showing up for a shift might have gotten a little attention. But to my knowledge, this never got investigated, which was always odd to us as the younger cousins. Like, Mike's parents didn't notify the authorities that they were missing. My aunt never notified the authorities, or like nobody did a missing persons around this, Tyler, which to me in this day and age is astonishing, but that also lends credence in my mind to some sort of maybe conversations that we weren't privy to as younger cousins, that this was something that they were planning to do and were trying to keep it on the down low,
Yeah, I was going to say that really struck me when you sent me the overview that they were never reported missing, either of them. I was going to ask this, but I think you kind of answered the question. But it sounds like then, like, have you or Sarah or anyone else had conversations with other family members about that? Like, ask that question, like, why wasn't anyone ever reported missing? And has anyone given you an answer?
Unfortunately not. So her mom, my aunt passed away, oh my gosh, 30 years ago of cancer. So it wasn't too long after, after Tana passed, and my aunt had lived a very difficult life and overcame that and got her degree in anthropology after she left my uncle, who was, again, horribly abusive. And so, we didn't want to bring up, I remember as a kid always being very interested, but didn't want to bring up hard things. That was kind of in our family. We were big on elephants in the living room that nobody wanted to talk about. That was just kind of the family way of doing things. We don't do that anymore, but that's how we did it back then. So my mom story was always AWOL. My aunt that lived up in Bremerton always, we think they went AWOL. But that no information. And it sounded like, again, based on the brief exchanges that Sarah had with Mike's parents, that's the story that they're saying, well, that's all that we can think must have happened. Again, nobody wants to think the worst, but it's just crazy to me that, again, nobody reported him missing. Again, if they really thought he was missing, you would have thought someone along the way would have reported him missing. Nobody did. So that kind of lends credence to this. But all these years down the road, that was what I want to circle back to. I would think there's some sort of statute of limitations if somebody goes AWOL, right? Like somebody would have called somewhere along the way. Tana would have reached out to her mom or her brother who's still alive, or a cousin, or my mom along the way. Heck, my mom just passed last year in October and had the same phone number for 25 years. We would have been easy to find if they would have been out there, which kind of leads me to believe that there was something other than AWOL, or maybe it started that way and then things just went sideways along the way badly for them, you know?
So to just bring it back to summarize quickly here, it sounds like Tana and Mike go missing somewhere, I'm going to say probably in Alaska or BC around 1978, maybe 1979.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair to say. Okay. So you said in the overview that you sent me in the correspondence we were having that there was actually a potential sighting of Tana in 1979 on, I think, near Vancouver Island, Campbell River area. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So my mom, growing up as children, so my stepdad was a big fisherman. So every summer we used to go for a month up to Campbell River fishing, and we would either stay right there in the area. I think Salmon Point was the name of the place that we used to stay. I'm sure all that's changed over time. It's been a really long time ago. Sometimes we'd go back into the islands and stay back there. But Mom had said that she's like, and she told me this is something she told me multiple times whenever we find a picture of Tana, and she goes, gosh, I wish I would have said something. I wish I would have walked across the store. So my mom said that in the summer of 79, and we weren't with them that year. It was just she and my dad that year, but she went to one of the local markets, and it sounded like it was somewhere in the Salmon Point area. I recalled them having like a little sort of tiny retail store, bait shop sort of thing in there. But she said that she was in the store, looked across the store, and she made hard eye contact with somebody that she's like, it was Tana. But she said, I was frozen in my tracks, and I turned around to grab my stepdad at the time. She said, I turned around to grab Dad, and I turned back around, and she was gone. And she said, we walked up and down the aisles of the store, and we couldn't find her. So if it was her, she was gone. So yeah, that was really disconcerting for my mom. My mom beat herself up till the day she died over that. So that was the last time that anybody, as far as we knew, potentially saw her.
So what prompted you and Sarah and some of the other family members to, from what I gather, recently go public, about this disappearance and look into it? Like, what prompted you?
It's always been in the back of my mind, and frankly, it's just me. My mom passed in October, and as we were going through pictures, as one does when a parent passes, there's always a box of pictures. We came across a picture of Tana, and my brother was up with me, my brother and I and Sarah. And Matt's like, yeah, this is so weird. It's so weird that nobody ever did anything or said anything. So the three of us started talking about it. And Sarah and I both do a fair amount of research and support the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Project through our tribe and elsewhere. But and Sarah is just an investigative journalist at heart. So, we both said, gosh, this would be a cool thing to pick back up again, because, all of the aunts, so her mom, my mom has passed, my uncle has passed. And I just don't want this to die out. I won't let her legacy and her memory die. She was just such a good person who was not treated in the manner that she deserved. And, if there was some sort of closure that could be had, it would be a beautiful thing, whether it's, finding DNA along the way. I think that was actually part of the other thing. Sarah had gone into Mom's GEDmatch account. So we had all done our DNA along the way. My daughters and I did on Ancestry. My aunt, who was my mom's great aunt that lived up there in Bremerton, where Tana lived for a while, had done their Ancestry as well. So Sarah had gotten the raw DNA information that you could upload to GEDmatch, which is, I'm sure that you know what GEDmatch is, but it's that organization that law enforcement and, cold case searchers use to cross-match and try to identify DNA hits when law enforcement comes across a bag of bones or they're looking for a murderer or something like that. And so Sarah had gone in there, as she does periodically, just to see if there's any hits on anything. We found another family mystery in there, which is not related to anything around this, but she did say that she hadn't seen anything about any pings or anything about Tana or anything like that. But she just pops in there periodically to see if there's been any updates and to make sure that our information is updated. That way someone can reach out if they did find, some evidence or something out there. So that was kind of how all that came about.
I saw on the Facebook post that Sarah did that people already were jumping in and, trying to help out with some genealogical research and things like that. Have you come across, have you or Sarah come across anything that's maybe helped you formulate a theory or any answers, or has it been pretty much stuff you already knew?
Yeah, we've been kind of stuck at this point. Like I said, there was another little bit of a family mystery that we uncovered, which kind of leads to this. So I can share that with you. So it sounds like the aunt that my mom lived with up in Bremerton, who would have been my grandmother's youngest sister, might have actually been my grandmother's daughter. so another aunt, but stuff like that was not uncommon back in the 20s when stuff like that happened. My grandma was born in 1908. I think my aunt would have been born in like 1928, which was before any of the other kids. So, but there was an email address attached to that. So their ancestry we can't get access to for whatever reason. Everything's locked up really tight in ancestry.com. So there's an email address attached to that in GEDmatch that Sarah has emailed. I've emailed as well. I don't know if it's still a current email address, but she and I are both pursuing, trying to figure out which family member that is, and to see if we can find out some more information along those lines. But I think from what I know, at least about GEDmatch, if they were able to find, again, some DNA or bones or something like that, and somebody was able to do research on that, there would have been some information on the GEDmatch site around that. But again, that being said, whoever has this email address, it's possible that they would reach out to them as well. So I've been slowly reaching out to all of the cousins, and there's one in particular. He's actually been in the hospital. All of my cousins are older. We are the youngest cousins. So a lot of people are at the age where they're passing and becoming really, really ill. But I've reached out to that cousin. He's been kind of the keeper of the genealogy of the family for a really long time. So hoping to get some more information on that, and would certainly update you down the road since I have your contact information if we heard anything new.
So one thing I wanted to ask you that, and I apologize, I didn't put this in the questions, but you kind of made me think about it as we're talking here. Like, do you think there's a component to Tana being Indigenous and her case not being covered or as present as maybe it should be?
So I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to tell you why. Again, I'm not trying to grasp onto a straw that is inappropriate to grasp on either. But the long and short of it is, if she was traveling through Canada, which we know that they were, right, back at that time in the world, Indigenous women or Indigenous-looking women or Indigenous-presenting women were absolutely not given the attention that they are being given now. I'm a podcast listener in a big way, and I've listened to a fair amount of podcasts about missing, murdered Indigenous and the residential schools and stuff up in Canada, and how law enforcement handles that, and it hasn't been good, right? And there's a whole reckoning happening in the U.S. as well as up in Canada around that. But so Mike was blonde, blue-eyed, tall, very Anglo-presenting, and Tana was the complete opposite. And, back then, people would say things like, squaw, and that was, sometimes meant to be nice, but sometimes meant as a slur. And there were a couple times that somebody referred to her that way, and he's like, that's not okay. He was like very protective of her, but she presented, she looked Indian, no two ways about it. And now that you're mentioning it, I remember even a comment that my aunt had made at one time. I guess somebody on base, because my uncle was a very high-ranking military officer there on the base, the Army base up there, but a comment made to Mike that he'd married a squaw, and it was not meant in a good or kind way, So I think it's quite possible, given what she looked like, and again, she was very kind and very sweet and would not have been one really to stand up for herself. She would have just kind of taken crappy treatment because that was what she was used to, sadly, growing up. And, I just have it in the back of my mind that something not great happened,
That's a good segue.
I don't know if it answers your question. But
no, it does. No, that's a great answer. And thank you for speaking to that. I think it's important to address that. And the ending of your answer was actually a great segment into what I wanted to talk about next. And you mentioned you had a really fascinating and interesting experience with a psychic that I think lends to that. Maybe things didn't end so well. So can you tell me about that? Because when you told me the story, I was kind of in shock. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it was super crazy. So I live in the Bay Area of California, and I'm just kind of a seeker of all things interesting. And so I was invited at one point, it wasn't even my idea, was invited to go to this event at the Berkeley Psychic Institute. And what this particular event was that they were going to have a panel of different kinds of psychics and mediums and channelers that were going to kind of sit up at the front of the room, and, they would reach out to people. It wouldn't be like me holding my hand up and saying, hey, I'm Lori, can you tell me about my cousin, right? It was nothing like that. It was, I want to say 4 or 5 people up in the front of the room, and this would have been 1995-ish. So maybe a little bit later than that. But sitting up in the front of the room, actually it probably would have been about 2000, 2002. So they're sitting up in front of the room, the, groups coming in at the back. I'm actually sitting in the very, very back in the middle, so not even easy to see. And there was a gal who was identifying herself as a trance channeler, and how she explained that was she would go into a, sort of an altered trance state and just open her mind and ask for anyone to come to her that could be related to someone in the room that had a story to share or something to say, right? And so there was other people in the room that, grandmas and grandpas were coming forth and, is such and so here, and other mediums and psychics were speaking up for them, and it was all very light and kind of sweet. And she speaks up, and she goes, and so part of being a trance channeler too is she like physically adopted a voice and a physical demeanor. So she kind of became the person, if you can imagine that, right? And so the other ones were speaking in their own voice and just kind of conveying messages back and forth. And what happened with her when she spoke up, like when she said, is Lori here? Like, and I'm going to try really hard to not cry here, I kind of lost my capacity to even breathe at that point. I took a deep breath, and because she said it like in Tana's voice. And I was in the back of the room, and everybody that was kind of moderating at the front of the room, there was a gal that's like, is there a Lori here? And I stood up and I said, yep, that's me. And this medium says, hey, cousin. And I'm like, she said, do you know who I am? And I said, I do, but can you tell me who you are? You know, because I didn't want to lead the gal that was doing this, right? And she said, it's Tana. And I did my level best to hold on to my composure. And she said, it's good to see you. And she asked me if I'd thought about her, and I said, not a day passes. You know, where are you? If you're speaking to me, you are probably no longer living, right? What happened? What can you tell us? I would love to be able to share it with the family. And the gal that was doing this just kind of physically slumped and groaned, right? And she said it was bad. Mike and I had stopped at a bar, and she didn't say when. I tried to get more information. She said Mike and I stopped at a bar, and we were having something to eat and having a beer, and these couple of guys invited us to, you know, stay at their house because where we stopped there wasn't a place to stay. And they had said that they were military guys too. And so, and I'm paraphrasing here at this point, but Mike trusted that, and it didn't end well. And, you know, summoned all my courage because, again, you want to know, but you don't want to know, right? And I said, well, what do you mean it didn't end well? And she said they were beheaded and buried in the forest. And so shortly thereafter, I mean, it was probably seconds thereafter, the channeler kind of, her physicality changes. She sat up, she stood up, she looked at me, and she said, excuse me. And she went she just left the whole proceeding and went in the back. And I kind of sat down, and the gal that was moderating said, wow, that was really interesting. You know, thank you. I can't even remember this gal's name. I wish that I could, but I sat down and I was just in shock at that point. And so after I was getting ready to leave, and the moderator came over and she said, the gal wants to talk to you for a minute. And so I met her in the back, and she said, I'm so sorry. She just kept saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And she was crying. And I said, you have nothing to apologize for. Thank you for putting yourself in this position. I can't even imagine, you know, what you feel or what you hear. And she said, this has never happened to me before. She said, you know, most things are like you were probably hearing. They were, you know, light, and, you know, I left an insurance policy in a drawer, and here's where you can find it. And she said, I've never actually had the experience of that. And she said, I had to get up and go because Tana walked me through what happened to her. So I actually was physically feeling her death. So that, she said, the thing that you can take from this is that she is in a better place now, that she's not suffering anymore. She said, but it wasn't good, and no one will probably ever find her.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, and I've carried that with me the whole time. So I mean, I came home, and I called my mom that night. It was like 10:30 at night, which was late for my mom. And I called her and I said, Mom, I just got to tell you what happened. It was the craziest thing. And I, you know, walked her through it. And of course my mom's crying, and you know, passed that on to other members of the family. And again, still nothing ever happened with anything. I didn't share that with Mike's family. I never actually had any conversations with Mike's family. I can't remember whether Sarah did, my daughter. I kind of don't think so. I feel like they were probably very conservative people, the way that she explained them, that I'm not sure that they would have taken positively to this story at all. But again, this was just my experience, completely out of left field. So that's sort of my last visions of her, and just had to carry the fact that the channeler said that she was in a better place and no longer suffering. So
looking back,
mm-hmm.
I mean, this is hard to unpack because, I mean, from your perspective, like, how much credence do you put into that experience with the psychic?
Yeah.
And then, when you compare that to other theories of, maybe Mike going AWOL, like, do you think it all blends
Right.
together, or, what runs through your mind?
Yeah. I think it does all blend together. Yes. I think that they were probably looking for some place because, I mean, if I recall my history correctly, we had some conflicts happening at that point. And also if, someone's not doing well in their military career and they want to escape, Canada was a place where most people went. Right. And so you want to stay off the grid as much as possible. We didn't have the internet and all that stuff back then yet, but they would probably want to stay off the grid. And if, the story to me, this story makes a ton of sense. Like if he was a military guy and someone that he ran into in a bar, it's kind of the Band of Brothers situation, right? He runs into another guy in a bar that says, hey, brother, we were military too. You want to come stay at our house? Or we've got a place at least that you can bunk tonight. Not expecting anything nefarious or terrible. But, perhaps something else happened to Tana. There's a lot of suppositions, when you're a guy with a pretty gal on your arm that walks into a backwoods bar, it's probably just a bunch of other guys and she's the only woman. My mind can go in a lot of different directions about that. And if, there's a couple of guys that say, hey, you just want to come with us, you can go in our truck and we'll take you, would have been super easy to overpower them and kind of do whatever they wanted to do. And I'm sure that they could have wanted to rob them. They could have wanted to do something terrible with my cousin Tana. It could have been just for fun. Who the hell knows? People are very unpredictable, as we know. But to me, it makes more sense than them just moving somewhere in Canada and living happily ever after and never, ever reaching out, calling, sending a letter or anything to anybody, right? Because, again, Mike was very close to his parents, and they maintain that they've never heard from him. And Tana was very close to all of the women in the family. Nobody ever heard anything, ever. So to me, it makes more sense than anything, and I've personally had a fair amount of interesting experiences. Our family tends to see and feel things and hear things from the other side, just depending on the family member. And so I don't disbelieve, especially seeing the way that this woman acted, reacted, apologized, the information that she had. Again, I didn't know any of these people. It's the first time I've been to this place. And if some crazy thing happened, like somebody said I was coming to the Berkeley Psychic Institute, somebody said this person had a missing cousin, somebody said, there would have had to have been so many things to line up for this to just be some thing that somebody was trying to do to punk me, you know what I mean? Or to try to make, none of that makes sense. I have to be open to the possibility, the probability, quite frankly, that that's actually the truth of what happened. So that's kind kind of been the only way that, and when I shared it with my mom and I had conversations about it after the fact, she said that just feels like it makes more sense than her just completely disappearing. That never made sense to anybody. Even if they would have gone AWOL, there would have been a letter or a postcard or something that said, I'm fine. Because even when she was with Mohammad and he was forbidding conversations and stuff, she would do a call and hang up, or she sent a postcard or something like, I'm okay. So that didn't happen. And we had no reason to believe that, Mike would do anything nefarious or bad. So
if by some miracle Tana or Mike are alive and maybe even listening, like, what would you want to say to them?
That it's okay and that we love them, and there's never too much time that's passed, and they could come bunk at my house in the Bay Area, and we'd be happy to take care of things and help them to get whatever legal support they needed with the military or anything else to help as well. I'm sure his parents would. We would do whatever we could to help them, and we just miss them terribly, just terribly. Yeah, a lot of broken hearts over her going, and hearing from his parents, same, because he was an only child. So
how can the public and people listening help you and the family search for them? Like, what can they do?
Oh gosh, that's probably the hardest question, because again, I they would be welcome to reach out to me. I don't want to open the floodgates. I'm happy to, provide my email address to you, or you have my email address. But, if anybody thinks I don't know if you, typically post a picture or anything like that. But, again, age progression photos, anybody who would be able to do something like that off her senior picture, that would be great. Support your local missing and murdered Indigenous women's project. Support people that say they're struggling with domestic abuse. Support the living. I'm not sure that there's anything we can do about the dead, and I'm pretty darn sure that that's where things are at. But care for the people in your life that are struggling now, and if somebody appears like they're struggling, they probably are. And just, don't try to push them into a solution. Just try to be there and be a supportive, kind ear and shoulder when they do reach out for help. Because I'm pretty sure with Tana, originally when she went missing, her mom was still married to her dad, and her dad had blamed her so profoundly for, the marriage failing with Mohammad, when the poor gal, she had broken nose, broken ribs, 2 broken eye sockets. He blamed her. Her father blamed her for the marriage failing. And, unfortunately, that is a narrative that is far too common in toxic households, something that I've worked very hard to, combat and volunteer with in my life. My daughters do the same. And my aunt, like I said, she finally got out of that. So oftentimes we can't do anything to help or support the dead and what's already done. But if you can support the people around you that are living, that would be my biggest wish. And I'm sure that Tana would agree.
Again, if you think you know anything about Natana or Mike's disappearance and you think you can help, please contact me and I'll put you in touch with Lori. If you enjoyed this episode and want to show appreciation, you can buy me a coffee at the link in the description. If you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, you can head to the Patreon. For $5 a month, you get ad and sponsor-free episodes, exclusive content, and early access to all new episodes of the podcast. If you don't want to spend any money, but you enjoy the podcast and want to support it, you can leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Also, you can find the Missing and Unexplained podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening to the Missing and Unexplained podcast.